La presentación, desgraciadamente, será hecha en inglés porque creo que mi español no me permitirá hablar de forma muy comprensible. Well, for starting, the approach that I took focused essentially on the suburban area, or some aspects of the suburban area, comparing some dynamics with the area within the wall, with the urban area, of course, between generally the end of the third, really the end of the third, and the beginning of the eighth. So the analysis of such a large area like this could hardly be the work of a single person, as it is understandable. The data which I based my analysis were collected over several decades by the archaeological unit of the university where I work and develop my research. So, the approach to the archaeological record was carried out through a transdisciplinary perspective, integrating diverse knowledge and distinct analysis to a territory study across several years, integrating diverse knowledge and distinct analysis, seeking to a diversification of inputs, to give more substance and support for the conclusions and interpretations. Ultimately, the aim was to increase the degree of reliability of research on the data that we have. It became important to integrate data from archaeological sites with documents framed by the analysis of the location of the places with the most approximate climatological and pollen data. Whenever possible, for the sites where we had such data available, we tried to integrate the analysis of archaeological materialities with absolute dates. Although most of you, I think, know the region that I bring here, it's always important to have an appropriate context for a better perception of the reality that we are dealing with. Something is dealing with something in an abstract way, other is to know really what the territory is. So the city of Braga, located in the northwest of Portugal, is currently the third independent urban agglomeration around 200,000 inhabitants, far exceeding the historical limits of the city. Because of this, most rural or suburban spaces or sites that we are studying are incorporating today into the continuous urban fabric, losing their original landscape contexts. I think this is clear in the image in the right, where you see the city that goes through Doom and Montelius. They now are urban parishes currently. Moving now to a more general context in terms of late antique geopolitics, without wishing, of course, to emphasize some aspects that indeed everyone knows here in detail, those that appear most relevant to us are the elevation of Braga to provincial capital within the scope of the late Roman reorganization, and later the region of Braga being the political center of the Suevic kingdom. The main idea that I think we should retain in this case, in this context, is the fact that the region became a center on the periphery, on the western edge of Europe, a circumstance that had manifestations in the archaeological records. So, in the late antique city and its immediate surroundings, as happened in several Roman cities, we identified the diverse buildings that are possibly associated with Christian worship. Unfortunately, to us, we don't have many archaeological excavation data. We correlate some excavation data with other data from posterior periods. So, normally, these remains are of a funerary nature, associated with elements and references to places of worship from later times. As I said, unfortunately, we are unable to provide planimetry of some of these places because of the lack of archaeological excavations. As in other cities, a considerable part of these buildings was located on the outskirts of the city, on the suburban area properly, close to the main communication routes. So in addition to that, this suburban area that possibly, in our case possibly because we don't have clear date of the specific aspects of the worship buildings. Also within the walls, the organic, at the same time, the organic nature of the spaces also changed. That's why I established the relationship between the suburban area and the urban area. In this period, especially relevant in the transition to the Suebic and Visigothic kingdoms, the occupation of several public buildings, such as entertainment places, already abandoned in the 4th century. So they abandoned some parts of the city, and it's archaeological documented the reoccupation of some of those places. Mostly the subdivision, in some cases of some domus, or into multifamily spaces, associated with the fluidity of the high imperial orthogonality. So the partial occupation of some circulation axis is archaeological documented. Houses that overlap or the streets. Although we cannot generalize it, or this fact, to the entire urban fabric, symptomatic the abandonment of part of the provincial elites, owners of some domus, and the reconstruction. Another interesting aspect, it's the apparent tendency of polarization of occupation of the urban fabric into the northeast part of the city, already in the late antique period, appearing to be related with the fact that in this northeast part of the city is located the episcopal complex. Although we cannot generalize and not extrapolate too much this fact, the late antique ceramic seems to be more concentrated in this part of the city. So, at this time that this happens inside the city, outside the city, in the suburban area, we identified in the southeast area, near the road 17, the occupation of the space of the deads, of part of the necropolis was occupied by structures that are related with the production of glass, namely. The 2 ovens were excavated outside the city and occupied a part of the necropolis. The necropolis still is functioning in the late antique times, but part of it was disaffected to be occupied by those production buildings. So we have this double tendency: occupation of the suburban area and reoccupation of some abandoned areas inside the city. Now, one place that is also, I think, related to the city, not directly in that same way that these suburban areas that I spoke before, is the archaeological site of Dum, or Dumio, like you usually call him. This place is constituted by two main groups of ruins. The first one that we can see here on left, it's a little bit blurry, but it's the main group. And the second one, almost 100 meters to the east, near the cemetery. You can see the relationship between both of them. So this place is known to his relation with Martin of Dum, or Dumio, that was supposedly apparently the first abbot bishop who founded the monastic community, and also became Bishop of Braga. So these two places are related, not entirely at the same time, but are related with the same character, the same historical character. That was Abbot or Bishop of Dum and Bishop of Braga. So to speak a little bit more about Dum and what happened, how is the archaeological record of Dum? In this the first set of ruins near the parish church that I told to you deserves special attention the two trilobite structures that overlaps and their relation with the other ruins. I also consider important to highlight the presence of the structures of the villa that belong to some structures that belong to the 1st and 2nd centuries. This phase was already documented in the first excavation campaigns, with the structures, I think, are perceivable, mainly presenting an orientation northwest-southeast. What the most recent campaigns of excavation brought to novelty to this set of ruins is the confirmation of the existence of a late Roman phase, which is characterized by remodeling the previous structures and creation of a more evident scenic and ostentatious apparatus, as can be seen in several other villae. We believe that the first trilobite structure may constitute one of these divisions, framed within the pars urbana of the villa, then was rebuilt to accommodate the cult building that formed part of the monastic complex that I think used to be here. In fact, this change in functionality in the area immediately related to the church does not invalidate the occupation of the site. In a previous carried out study of materials, we selected some key locations for interpretation of the built area using the elements we had available. The first structure selected was a set of large pits for inert material extraction in the south. We identify elements of common Roman and late Way ceramics, as well as elements of Tunisian amphorae. The analysis of these elements allows to classify these pits of the ceiling of these pits generally between the 5th and the 7th centuries. So it seems to us that it's possible to associate it with an important construction moment in this area, notably the extraction of inert materials for their eventual use as mortar. The other location that we analyzed on the bottom was on some landfills over the ruins of the villa, and eventually part readapted to the monastery, where the structures identified were clearly no longer in use. These levels allowed the identification of late antique elements and common medieval pottery, making it somewhat certain that this structure was no longer occupied in the Middle Ages. So, we considered relevant to establish and to define really what was the occupation of the place, to combine the studies with the C14 analysis of the charcoals that sealed those pits that I described. So, as you can see, the two dates of the charcoals are associated with the Suevic Visigothic period, which was initially advanced within the analysis of ceramics. This apparently seems to us consistent with the functionality that I spoke before. Given the relationship of the supposed basilica with some various graves in the place, or various tombs, we thought that was also very interesting and useful to date some of the graves. So that opportunity arose in one of the tombs we identified in the southernmost area, with characteristics somewhat similar to the ones identified in the 1990s. As you can see, the dates presented are around the end of between the 5th and the 6th centuries. To us, within the use of the space as a monastic space, I think it's more admissible that the main set of graves are related to the presence of the monastic community founded by Martin of Dumio, the first abbot bishop. So, for these interpretative possibilities and to establish really what was the occupation of this place, it seems to us important to revisit some of the stratigraphy of the Basilica of Doom in the way in which the different construction stages are linked together. So we analyze these three areas, selected as A, B, and C for those structures that I talked to you about. One of the most striking aspects is the fact that we are clearly in the presence of two distinct buildings, an older, made up of elements and earth binding, consistent was used in the remaining structures from the 4th century. And the second one, made of joined with the yellow mortar, associated with an opsigninum for floor and worst construction quality. The other area, the second area, it's part of a thermal building associated original to the villa that existed in Dumio, with an occupation that goes from the Suebic and Visigothic monastic space. Here, we identified phase of occupation from the 4th centuries and their subdivision and change in functionality, as happened in some domos of the city of Braga, too. So there was a reoccupation of spaces, changing it completely the functionality. The thermal building has parallels with the other buildings of the same time, and the wall from the 6th century building overlaps directly in the opposite pavement, as also happened in the divisions identified inside the chapel in the other ruins. So the abandonment levels provides us with ceramic around the 4th and 7th centuries, such as elements of Phocian red slipware, late Hispanic, or late Grey, or even late Gallic. These elements seems to be part of the adaptation of the space, eventually, I think, as a monastic space. Here, it was also possible to establish some absolute dates. In this place, for the abandonment level of the structures completely. So, as you can see here in these dates, that could happen somewhere in the middle of the 7th century. At least from this part, I cannot generalize it to the whole space, but at least it stays here that reference that part of the buildings occupied or abandoned in the mid-7th centuries. So possibly, somehow, the 7th century's crisis could have some repercussion in the productive area, and led to some changes in the occupation of spaces, preceding the political changes of the 8th century already. So at mid-7th century. Now, after this exhaustive exposition of Doom, but which I consider relevant in the sense of justifying some of the positions taken in the interpretation of the building, somehow that changes a little bit what was established before. I will now show in a more succinct way some data from São Frutuoso de Montelbos, also famous because of being the burial place of the bishop, the homonymous bishop, St. Frutuosus, also from Braga and Doom. So, in addition to the vast set of ruins that we identified inside the common space, which is not worth detailing because it's associated with the chronologies, outside the scope of this meeting, we highlight the remains of the original mausoleum and the structure in the northern area of the complex that could be contemporary or even from a period immediately before the mausoleum. These are the two areas signed with these arrows, the mausoleum here at the bottom and the structure, just the structure over there in the north part. We can see in this figure that the foundations of the mausoleum excavated for the first time in these last years are made up of reused elements. They are present in the west, south, and these foundations. The north side was completely rebuilt due to the incorporation of the combat that develops around the original mausoleum. We can see here in the image on the right and below also that one, the overlapping of the original foundations with the conventual buildings, and then with some elements of the rebuilt on the general direction of the buildings and national monuments in the 40s that completely changed the whole place and rebuilt it into their taste and their ideas of place. So, now, for centuries, so we can associate somehow this place with Doom and Braga, and the importance in the organization of space around the Via 19 that leaves the city into the north direction through the river. So these were the main references in the area, in this area. So given the conditions of the structural location on the top of a hill, with large earth movements associated with the construction of the convent, which incorporated mausoleum in its interior, we are unable to relate it with stratigraphic contexts. So willing to go a little further than the usual analysis, the typological analysis that some historians and archaeologists made of the places, we consider relevant to attempt absolute dating by OSL of some of the mortars related to the mausoleum. Therefore, and to deal with the late antique buildings of the group, we consider the information from the samples 33 and 86. It's a little bit up, but it's the first was collected from the foundation of the part of the mausoleum that is still fully preserved, and the second was collected from one of the sections of the structure located in the north platform. As you can see in the table that I present to you, these samples, the two below, was signed only one, but the square was a little bit up. Are associated with that range for the northern zone between the second half of the 4th century and the first half of the 6th. And for the mausoleum, between the end of the 5th and the first half of the 7th. This date seems to allow us the hypothesis of the adaptation of a previous structure to bury the saint and not the construction of a building, at least following these absolute dates that we have here. Who possibly died around the mid-7th century. 665, I think. So, considering the analysis that was possible to establish, I present to you an interpretation of the two main sets of elevations of the mausoleum, interpreted within the whole set. At the moment, with the data that we have, we can put forward a possible chronology of the beginning of the transition of the 7th century for the elements associated with the original mausoleum. Due to its proximity and possible presence in the dome domain is closely related to it. In which conditions, they are not completely clear, but these are the two main elements in the north outskirts of the city, in the fertile area of the north. Between the city and the Carafado River, the main river, as I talked to you, I present to you. So now leaving this fertile area in the northern suburbs of the city with flora, it tends to be more favorable to agricultural practice. I bring to you another place frequently mentioned when discussing Braga region in the late antique period, the archaeological complex of Santa Marta da Valpierra. The most relevant elements are associated with this period, are this known elongated building in grey and the basilica in a lighter color. Without wishing to make too many considerations about these structures that possibly every one of you know, I think it's important to make some brief considerations about their location conditions. In fact, as I believe is perceivable in this image, both are on the top of one of the most important hills in the south part of the region of Braga. Added to this fact is the circumstance that a significant fortified settlement of the Iron Age was also located here, so which increases the difficulty of accessing the space. So with an elevated space over the city, with a set of fortifications that isolate him and make it more preeminent over the city. I consider this relevant for the interpretation, for reinforcing the interpretation of the place of Valpierra within the Braga region, and what signifies, what is the interpretation for these buildings. The materials collected from the site, studied in more detail with Baroque Ares and Moraes, corroborate the Suebic occupation of the space. They identify late antique ceramics with chronologies that can be classified between the 5th and 6th centuries, like, for example, late grey imitations, African, or Phocian red slipware. They also identified several common and regional productions, generally associated with chronologies between the 4th and the 7th centuries. In addition to the medieval ceramics associated with so-called Reconquest Castle, this place was also occupied in later periods because of its good and excellent defensive characteristics. We identify other they identify other ceramic elements that could be after the 7th century. However, at the moment, it has not been possible to associate them with a set of better known structures that I present here. And these are related to a Suebic foundation with Visigothic continuity of occupation. I think also it's relevant to highlight the presence of a few Byzantine elements, such as the one in the image below on the right, which could be related with the contact between the occupants of Valperga and, of course, the south of Peninsula or Eastern Mediterranean. As you can see in this kind of anachronic map, but that tries to present the settlement in late antiquity in all and the changes. The occupation of in the occupation of Braga and its suburbs seems clear that there is a greater density of sites surrounding the city, related to the communication access, like happens in some places. In late antique landscape, there is, I think, an important interdependence between the urban core and the suburban area, with relevant settlements being identified, concentrated primarily in the part of the building. Some of them, older villas occupied, in one case as a monastery, as I show you, in the more fertile area within the great agricultural potential. The various possible suburban cemetery basilicas associated in the necropolis corresponds to the main population centers identified in the subsequent periods. With the beginning of the 5th century and the emergence of the Suebic kingdom, we started to identify slowly some changes in the settlement, both in rural and suburban area, related to changes in social organization that is more evident in the 6th and the 7th centuries. The presence of the Suebic elite is not clear in the urban areas, in the sense of replacing the Roman provincial elite. The Suebic court is much more related, documentally and archaeologically, as I think I show in Valperga, with the two areas around the city. Dume and Valperga are clearly the places that I think could be more related to the Suebic court, or structures related to it. Valperga seems to present characteristics potential associated with the Palatine complex and offers excellent visibility to the city and all roads that allow access to it and all the region of the suburban area of Braga, controlling all the territory. So now for conclusion, and then I'm really in the limit of time, I think. We can highlight the notable construction progress in late antiquity, both before the end of the Roman Empire, both in the city and the suburban area, closely related, I think, to elevation to provincial capital. I think it's also important to note the occupation and transformation during the Suebic period of several great Roman sites, like the city itself and Dume, or Valperga, documenting in both some aspects with affinities within the archaeological record. We see in the later periods the aspects like compartmentalization of spaces and changes in functionality. That's the main aspects of the organization that I think it's clear. Another thing that I think is relevant is the occupation of spaces in top of the hills, like Valperga, possibly associated with the ruling elite. You know, top of the hills related, in this case, I think, with elites. One aspect that is important and relevant, and is common to other places, is the important role that Christianity came to play in the organization of the urban fabric and the immediate surroundings, so of the suburbia, properly speaking. Finally, it's important, not within the suburbia, but to remark that inside the city, the main structure is clearly the episcopal set, like in other cities, and so Braga is not so different in some aspects, some other ways. They have some particularities, but has some, I think, affinities. So, it's some of the reference, and thank you very much. It's all I have to you today. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for 3 illuminating presentations. Pilar, if you don't mind, I have one question for each participant. For Francisco, it's a very specific question. It's about the chronology of the glass production center in the necropolis area. So when does it start, and do we know when it starts and when it ends? For Nikos, looking at these wine production areas, I started thinking about Caroline Goodson's book, Cultivating the City in early medieval Italy, and her argument that these gardens within the city are parts of family identity. It's not just an economic unit, but it's a whole social institution. And I was wondering, because with wine production, one tends to think, right, this is very attached to family, like aristocratic households, right, production. And I wonder if there's a dimension of family identity in the construction of these wine production areas within the city. That once you start building one, there's sort of a competition, intra-elite competition, to emulate their peers. And for Enrico, when you made the comment about the G20 meeting in Ravenna, I was thinking all these aristocrats might have come with their entourages, right, with a large number of people, which makes more sense to stay outside the city walls than inside the city walls. But also these are armed entourages, like people with weapons. And I wonder if, in general, more generally, the presence of aristocrats outside the city is not just a decision of the aristocrats, but also a push from the city dwellers to keep people with weapons outside the city walls. They could be very useful during wartime, but during peacetime, it's better to keep them outside. Thank you.
So, Francisco, please.
Bien, puedo contestar en español, a ver si consigo. Lo hablabas de los de fuera de la ciudad, ¿no? Es que tenemos fuera de la ciudad y en zonas que estaban también abandonadas en la ciudad, en los edificios de espectáculos también tienen estructuras, como yo dije, que fueron abandonadas en el cuarto y ocupados. Esencialmente, las fechas son entre lo quinto y lo 7 que tenemos esos centros de producción. Después, no. No sé si tienes algo.
Enrique, no, Nico, sorry.
No, yes, thank you very much. So regarding the wine making process, you're right, and this is something to consider. So it seems that all our installations, they are part of a household, and we can archaeologically construct how these early medieval houses, I mean, these would be the ground floors or semi-basements, and on top of it there would be a mud brick upper floor where the living quarters, 1 or 2 floors, probably one, would have been. So actually, during excavation, what we find is all the possessions of the house having fallen inside these basements. Our idea so far has been based on the thing that most of them, they are wine presses of this press and screw type, this Vitruvian style. And the thing is that these are a considerable investment, so it's much more, I mean, we believe much more than to serve the household needs. generally, what we know from late antiquity about this kind of wine presses, we can say or we can estimate the production, and the idea to invest and make this is because you use it constantly. There is also another technical feature, might be too special, but in this late antique winemaking, a big discussion is about the pressing vats and the collection vats. So usually in smaller scale production, you would have larger collecting vats because the grape juice would stay there for a week or two, according to the rules. The problem in our case, it's very small because immediately it's been transferred to somewhere else. So we have tried to estimate the possible production based on the size and based on this number of days, and we believe that there is an opportunity going on. So we're going back to the economy, that for some reasons may be connected with the geostrategical, the reorganization of the administration. And what happens, I mean, there is a nice article on that. It seems that from the mid-7th century, the army of the East moves, I mean, the defeated army of the East, after the Arab defeat, moves from Judea, Palestine, Syria, to a more area of Amorium. And maybe this army needs to be fed, needs to be provided with wine. And all this wine used to come up to the 6th century, up to the Arab conquest from Gaza and from those areas. So new areas are being now trained to produce. So we believe there is this opportunity, and you're true, all these are private ones. So probably the private sector comes and invests to tap on this income, secured by bots from the state. That's the thing. Maybe. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know if you. Bravo. So now I don't have. I'm sorry if I gave the impression that I mean that aristocracy were living outside the city. In fact, Lombard aristocracy are supposed by Paolo Diacono to live outside. This, I guess, is an excuse that he used because the city was destroyed by Avars. So he say, well, it's like this because the Lombards were outside the city. But in fact, what I guess is that they didn't care where they had to decide from inside or outside the city. And the city is not considered only the city inside the city walls, but also a wide conception. It depends from the orography or where is considered a city. So in fact, this is what I believe. I'm not sure it's like this. I want to discuss with you this. But in fact, in city like Ravenna, where with all the river, the lagoons, the valleys, in fact, the 1 mile all around the city is impossible to maintain because in fact there's sea and all that stuff. So it's a wider construction. And also, if it's 4 kilometers by the city walls, the suburbs of Class becomes in fact part of what was considered the same city. But after, as it's also considered by the citizen of Class, become a total new city. With his numerus, so his exercitus of classiaris, not in the same, but it happens after the 5th and 6th century. At the beginnings, they were considered the same unity. And I guess it was impossible for the Roman law, also in the 6th century, to move arms inside. But time changes and possibly it's different later, but we don't have evidence.
I have a question considering what we were discussing yesterday with Lauro and Damian. And it's something about that you have just said, but this question is more for you. Do you think it's possible to calculate or to make an approximation of the size of the suburbium of Amorium or Braga? Because in some way Enrico answered about that, but I would like to know your opinion about this possibility to calculate, or or if you think that is impossible in the current situation of the knowledge.
Well, in the case of Braga, it's not very easy because, as I told, the specific characteristics of the growth of the city doesn't allow to have
Make an approximation or no?
Not very easy. You know the existence. We know the area approximate from where we think there are remains of those periods, but we don't. We can't perceive in all that area if it was a continuous or if the specific differences.
The continuity is impossible to see if there is a continuity.
Yes, we could do that approximation, calculating the area of the sites that we know that exist. But as we don't know the specific characteristics, we cannot assure that it's a continuous or not.
And Nikos, in your case?
Again, it's very difficult, and we don't have much of that evidence. I mean, what we can definitely comment upon is that it seems that the suburban or the suburban uses, let's say better, are more visible in late antique times, and then in the early Middle Ages, contrary to the general narrative, we have a concentration in the city, maybe for security reasons. So the most densely populated time of the city is the 7th and 8th century. We see it inside and we see what's happening immediately outside. And then when maybe the great threat ceases to exist from the 10th century on, then again the country land becomes much more populated and everything is much more evident outside the city.
Please, Sabine. One moment, Sabine, because they will give you a microphone.
Just one question concerning Braga. You classified Dume as a monastery. What are the arguments right now? Because so far as I know, it's not so already decided that there has been a monastery, or yes?
Well, the documental sources seems to make us assume that Dume is a monastery or could be a monastery. And we have a confirmed cult building and the occupation of spaces. Not entirely the plan of Dume, but crossing those data, I think at least we can assume the hypothesis of being a monastery. It was, no. You don't think it is a monastery?
But it's an hypothesis.
Yes, it's an hypothesis, of course. Of course.
Okay, thank you.